Schisms among the Jews are cultural as well as religious. They have happened as a product of historical accident, geography, and theology. First Temple era. The Hebrew Bible describes Levantine civilization at the time of Solomon's temple as prone to idol worship, astrology, worship of reigning kings, and paganism. The divinities or idols worshipped included Baal and possibly Asherah. This was in direct contrast to the teachings in the Torah, and was condemned by the ancient biblical prophets who attacked those Israelites and Judeans who became idol worshippers. The biblical narrative describes the split by the kingdom of Israel from the kingdom of Judah. It points to Solomon's unfaithfulness to the divine covenant as the reason for the schism. When Rehoboam, Solomon's son, became king, the people requested tax reform. Rehoboam refused. This caused the break. At first, Rehoboam considered a military solution, but the prophet Shemaiah told him not fight because God had caused the schism. Jeroboam, the leader of the tax revolt, became the leader of the northern kingdom. He built a northern temple with calf-like idol images that were condemned by the Judeans of Judah. After the destruction and exile of the northern kingdom of Israel by Assyria, non-Yahwistic practices continued. The narratives of Jeremiah and others interpreted this as the cause of the failure, destruction, and exile of the southern kingdom of Judah by Babylonia. Nebuchadnezzar had additional reasons for taking over Judah and turning its inhabitants into exiles, including challenging its great rival Egypt. Samaritans. One small sect of Samaritans is still extant. The Samaritan faith and that of other Jews diverged over 2 millennia ago. They consider themselves to be Bnei Yisrael, a term used universally by Jewish denominations for the Jewish people as a whole, but do not call themselves Yehudim. The word Yehudim comes from the Hebrew word Yehudi, which means from the tribe of Judah. They consider themselves to be descendants of the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. Therefore, they consider that Yehudim is only applicable to mainstream Jews. Second Temple era. This was a time when the Jews lived under Persian, Greek, and Roman power and influence. The main internal struggles during this era were between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, as well as the Essenes and Zealots. The Pharisees wanted to maintain the authority and traditions of classical Torah teachings and began the early teachings of the Mishnah, maintaining the authority of the Sanhedrin, the supreme Jewish court. According to Josephus, the Sadducees differed from the Pharisees on a number of doctrinal grounds, notably rejecting ideas of life after death. They appear to have dominated the aristocracy in the temple, but their influence over the wider Jewish population was limited. The Essenes preached a reclusive way of life. The Zealots advocated armed rebellion against any foreign power such as Rome. All were at violent loggerheads with each other, leading to the confusion and disunity that ended with the destruction of the Second Temple and the sacking of Jerusalem by Rome. Christianity. The first Christians were the original Jewish followers of Jesus, a Galilean healer, preacher, and, according to early Christian belief, the resurrected Messiah. After his crucifixion by the Romans, his followers broke over whether they should continue to observe Jewish law, such as at the Council of Jerusalem. Those who argued that the law was abrogated broke to form Christianity. The eventual redefinition of Moses' law by Jesus' disciples and a belief in his deity, along with the development of the New Testament, ensured that Christianity and Judaism would become different and often conflicting religions. The New Testament depicts the Sadducees and Pharisees as Jesus' opponents, whereas the Jewish perspective has the Pharisees as the justified predecessors of the rabbis who upheld the Torah, including the oral law, which Christians refer to as the Mosaic Law or Pentateuch or Old Covenant, in contrast to the New Covenant. Karaite Judaism. Karaite Judaism is a Jewish denomination characterized by reliance on the Tanakh as the sole source of binding Jewish law. Karaites rejected the rabbinic tenet that an oral Torah was transmitted to Moses at Mount Sinai along with the written scriptures. Accordingly, they rejected the central works of rabbinic Judaism which claimed to expound and interpret this written law, including the Midrash and the Talmud, as authoritative on questions of Jewish law. Karaites had a wide following between the 9th and 12th centuries, but over the centuries the numbers have dwindled drastically. Today they are a small group living mostly in Israel. Estimates of the number of Israeli Karaites range from as low as 10,000 to as high as 50,000. There is a divergence of views about the historical origins of Karaite Judaism. Most scholars and some Karaites maintain that it was founded at least in part by Anan ben David, whereas other Karaites believe that they are not the historical disciples of Anan ben David at all, and point out that many of the later sages argued that most of Anan's teachings were derived from rabbinate law. The State of Israel, along with its chief rabbinate, ruled that Karaites are Jews, and while critical differences between Orthodox Judaism and Karaite Judaism exist, American Orthodox rabbis ruled that Karaism is much closer to Orthodoxy than the conservative and reform movements, which may ease issues of formal conversion. Sabbatians and Frankists. In 1648 Shaddai Tzvi declared himself to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah whilst living in the Ottoman Empire. Vast numbers of Jews, known as Sabbatians, believed him, but when under pain of a death sentence in front of the Turkish Sultan Mehmed IV, he became an apostate from Judaism by becoming a Muslim. His movement crumbled. Nevertheless, for centuries, small groups of Jews believed in him, and the rabbis were always on guard against any manifestations of this schism, always suspicious of hidden Shabzelik. Indeed, when the movement of Hasidism began attracting many followers, the rabbis were once again suspicious that this was Sabbatianism in different garb. It would take many centuries to sort out these complex divisions and schisms and see where they were headed. After his mysterious death somewhere in the area of Turkish Albania, groups of Jews continued to be clandestine followers of Shaddai Tzvi even though they had outwardly converted to Islam, these Jews being known as the Dunma. Jewish converts to Islam were, at times, therefore regarded with great suspicion by the fellow Muslims. A few decades after Shaddai's death, a man by the name of Jacob Frank, claiming mystical powers, preached that he was Shaddai Tzvi's successor. He attracted a following, preached against the Talmud, advocated a form of licentious worship, and was condemned by the rabbis at the time. When confronted by the Polish authorities, he converted to Catholicism in 1759 in the presence of King Augustus III of Poland, together with groups of his Jewish followers, known as Frankists. To the alarm of his opponents, he was received by reigning European monarchs who were anxious to see the Jewish subjects abandon Judaism and apostatize. The Frankists eventually joined the Polish nobility and gentry. Hasidim and Mitnagdim. Note: while the name Hasidim has gained popular and positive approval, the name Mitnagdim has fallen out of popular usage and may even be regarded as offensive by some. The arrival of Rabbi Israel ben Eliezer, known as the Baal Shem Tov, on the scene of Jewish history in Eastern Europe would herald the commencement of a sea change in what is known today as Haredi Judaism. Even though he did not write books, he succeeded in gaining powerful disciples to his teachings that were based on the earlier expositions of Rabbi Isaac Luria, known as the Ari, who had based much of his Kabbalistic teachings on the Zohar. The Baal Shem Tov came at a time when the Jewish masses of Eastern Europe were reeling in bewilderment and disappointment engendered by the two notorious Jewish false messiahs Sabbatai Zevi and Jacob Frank in particular. The Baal Shem Tov witnessed Frank's public apostasy to Christianity, which compounded Zevi's earlier apostasy to Islam. The Baal Shem Tov was thus determined to encourage his influential disciples to launch a spiritual revolution in Jewish life in order to reinvigorate the Jewish masses' connections with Torah Judaism and to vigorously motivate them to bind themselves to the joyous observance of the commandments, worship, Torah study, and sincere belief in God, so that the lures of Christianity and Islam, and the appeal of the rising secular enlightenment to the Jewish masses would be weakened and halted. To a large degree Israel succeeded in Eastern Europe already during his lifetime, and gaining momentum following his death. The Baal Shem Tov's disciples spread out to teach his mystical creeds all over Eastern Europe. Thus was born Hasidic Judaism. Some of the main movements were in Russia, which saw the rise of the Chabad Lubavitch movement, Poland, which had the Gera Hasidim, Galicia had Bobov, Hungary had Satmar Hasidim, and Ukraine had the Breslavis, and many others that grew rapidly, gaining literally millions of adherents, until it became the dominant brand of Judaism in Eastern Europe in the century following the Baal Shem Tov's death. The Jewish masses flocked to this new inspired brand of mystical Judaism, and retained the connections to the Jewish heritage and way of life. Only when this new religious movement reached Lithuania did it meet its stiffest resistance among the Lithuanian Jews. It was Rabbi Elijah ben Shlomo Zalman, known as the Vilna Gaon, and those who followed his classic stringent Talmudic and halakhic scholasticism, who put up the fiercest resistance to the Hasidim. They were called mitnagdim, meaning opposed. The Vilna Gaon, who was himself steeped in both Talmudic and Kabbalistic wisdom, analyzed the theological underpinnings of this new Hasidism, and in his view, concluded that it was deeply flawed since it had elements of what may be roughly termed as panentheism and perhaps even outright pantheism, dangerous aspirations for bringing the Jewish Messiah that could easily be twisted in unpredictable directions for Judaism, as had previously happened with the Zevi and Frank religious revival fiascos, and an array of complex rejections of the religious ideology. The Vilna Gaon's views were later formulated by his chief disciple Rabbi Chaim Volozhan in his work Nefesh HaChaim. The new Hasidic leaders countered with their own religious counter-arguments, some of which can be found in the Tanya of Chabad Lubavitch. Much of the debate remains obscure. However, regardless of the unpopularity of the move, the Vilna Gaon and the scholars of the Beth Din of Vilna went so far as to place at least one severe cherem upon the Hasidim, officially excommunicating them from Judaism, which they in turn copied and did likewise to the mitnagdim. The Vilna Gaon's strongest opposition was to the founder of Chabad Lubavitch, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Physical fights broke out in Vilna, with each side trying to gain the favor of the Russian authorities and declaring the other side to be beyond the pale of Judaism. The bitterness and animosity between the two camps run deep, and basically whoever joined one wing did not attend or pray in the same synagogues as the other wing, nor have the same Torah teachers, and they would generally not marry into each other's families, which is still more or less the rule today, where there is a high degree of internal communal structure. Little of the split between Hasidim and mitnagdim remains within the modern Haredi world, when confronted by mutual threats, such as from the secular Jews of the Haskalah, or by the onslaught of communism and the Holocaust, or faced by secular Zionists. Hasidim and mitnagdim work together. When the outside world does not threaten them, the battle of ideas resumes as an intellectual debate. Each group has its own unique method of yeshiva study and communal life, no matter where they establish themselves. They tend to live in different neighborhoods that are still within commuting distance, although even these differences are quickly disappearing. In modern-day Israel, Hasidim support the Agudat Israel party in their Knesset, and the non-Hasidic Mitnagdim support the Degel HaTorah party. Degel HaTorah is led by Rabbi Aharon Yehuda Liebsteinman and Bnei Brak. Agudat Israel and Degel Torah have formed a political alliance. There is also another large community that follows the rabbinical teachings of the Edar Cherdis. These include the Satmar Hasidim and the Perashim communities, which do not support any groups that participate in the Israeli government or in Israel, including elections. Orthodox versus Reform, East versus West. For the time of the French Revolution of 1789, and the growth of liberalism, added to the political and personal freedoms granted by Napoleon to the Jews of Europe, many Jews chose to abandon the foreboding and isolating ghettos and enter into general society. This influenced the internal conflicts about religion, culture, and politics of the Jews to this day. Some Jews in Western Europe, and many Jews in America, joined the religiously liberal New Reform Judaism movement, which drew inspiration from the writings of modernist thinkers like Moses Mendelssohn. They coined the name Orthodox to describe those who opposed the Reform. They were criticized by the Orthodox Judaism rabbis such as Samson Raphael Hirsch in Germany, and condemned, particularly by those known today as followers of Haredi Judaism, based mainly in Eastern Europe. Thus a cultural schism was also created between the more westernized English, German and French-speaking Western European Jews and the more religiously observant Yiddish-speaking Eastern European brethren, whom they denigratingly labeled Ost Yidden. These schisms and the debates surrounding them continue with much ferocity in all Jewish communities today as the Reform and Orthodox movements continue to confront each other over a wide range of religious, social, political and ethnic issues.